Hi, I'm Charlie Starr. The video you are about to watch is part of my free course, How to Read a Birth Chart. Signing up is easy. Simply subscribe to my channel, turn on the notification bell, and shoot me an email to the address in the description box below, letting me know you want to be enrolled. I will reply with a welcome email, including the syllabus and other free course materials. Then head on over to my channel page and find the How to Read a Birth Chart free course playlist. Hit play and follow the step-by-step instructions to become a true birth chart master. And now, back to this video. Hey guys, welcome back. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the planet Saturn and what does Saturn mean in your own personal birth chart. Just like the other planets, we are going to first talk about the mythology of Saturn, then we're going to dive into a little bit of the astronomy of Saturn. Third, we're going to talk about Saturn more specifically, what does it mean in your chart, and also some examples. And then lastly, we're going to talk about what signs does Saturn rule. All right, mythology. There isn't as much mythology surrounding the planet Saturn as there is with the planet Jupiter and Mercury and some of the other planets. But what we do know about Saturn is actually from the same story that I talked in the video right before this about Jupiter. So if you haven't watched that, I'll put a link to it above. The mythology here is essentially that Saturn and his cohort Ops are the parents of Jupiter, Neptune, and Pluto, amongst a few other Olympian gods. Saturn is a Titan, so he's an older god. In Greek mythology, Roman mythology, there is a rule about a deity who creates something that they then govern, is that it cannot be a thing that they themselves are under. So Saturn essentially is a primordial god who exists outside of time and outside of rules, limits, and restrictions. And he is likened to, I would say he is Father Time. And what Saturn does is, so essentially like Saturn created time. And Saturn exists outside of time because that is the rule about Greek gods. If you're going to create something and then govern it, you have to be outside of it, right? So this is like another example of this would be like virgin goddesses being like the shepherds or the goddesses that like mothers and wives would pray to. So if this goddess is the goddess of essentially like sex and procreation, then they are virgins. They're not, they're outside, they're existing outside of the quality that they are governing. So Saturn exists outside of time, but Saturn is the god of time. And in the last story, we talked about Jupiter gaining power over time, right? But for us in the three-dimensional physical Earth realm, Saturn very much still governs our world, right? So this is the fixed structures of our universe. This gives foundation and structure to our entire experience. If we don't have the quality of Saturn in our lives, then the earth shifts beneath our feet and we have nothing to stand on. There's no point in working hard for something that is seeping away. We have to have some assurance that there's going to be a structure and a predictable outcome of cause and effect, that we have to be able to trust that there are laws that always if then rules, right, to things, right? If we are working hourly and getting paid hourly, we have to like trust these structures that, okay, we've worked a certain amount of hours, we're going to get a certain amount of money, and then we can then calculate and plan ahead. This is all Saturnian. With this comes Saturn being associated with time, longevity, working hard, putting in time, putting in effort, taking a traditional approach, because this is a path that's already been carved out. So Saturn is a pattern planet, really. Saturn has to do with patterns that already exist and our tendency to fall back into patterns. So for this reason, Saturn is not only a god that rules and a planet that rules the structures of our lives, like time, numbers, the physical plane, hard work, longevity, old age. All of these things are associated with Saturn, but Saturn is also considered a karmic planet. Because of Saturn's connection to the Earth and the structures of the Earth, Saturn also became the god of agriculture. So he is often portrayed with a scythe, I never know how to say that word, but that you use to harvest the grain. So a god of agriculture and a god of farming. And also Saturn is sometimes depicted with a hourglass, right? Because of being the god of time. All right, some astronomical facts about Saturn. Saturn is also a gas giant like Jupiter, but not as big as Jupiter. Nonetheless, Saturn is the second largest planet in our solar system and the sixth from the sun, right after Jupiter. We are going in order of the planets from closest to the sun to the furthest. We just did Jupiter. The next planet further out is Saturn. Saturn is mostly known for his rings. Saturn actually has thousands of rings and they are the most visible. Other planets do have rings as well, but Saturn definitely has the most impressive, the most visible rings that we know of in the solar system. So what this symbolically tells me is if Saturn is the god of time and his rings are so visible, what do we know about time is that we think of time as linear, but what is Saturn telling us astronomically is that time is actually spherical, is that it's all coming back around, which really reminds us of Saturn having to do with cyclical patterns. Time is basically the experience of cause and effect, and cause and effect on a short distance can feel linear, but it's actually part of the sphere. So everything is always coming back around. And they do say that when they're talking about karma is that what goes around comes around, right? So we'll get into Saturn as a planet of karma when we talk about what Saturn means in your individual birth chart. Saturn is also surrounded by 82 moons. That's a lot of moons. And when we look at what the moon means, the moon has to do with our reflective self, our subconscious self, and reflecting back on the past and absorbing the emotional memory of things and containing the emotional memory of things. Saturn being the god of time, there is a lot that has to do with the past, and there's a need for a lot of reflection on the past when we're moving forward in our karma. All right, so what does Saturn mean in your own personal birth chart? All right, the most important thing that Saturn often symbolizes in somebody's birth chart is their karma and also where in their life they experience the need to work on something, because this is definitely a planet where you need to work hard in order to get the fruits of. Unlike the planet of Jupiter, which is going to just like automatically expand, Saturn is the need for us to work within a structure, and if we're going to change it, we have to work to change that structure, to change that pattern, and it doesn't happen easily. Saturn also represents, like I said, longevity and old age. So one thing that I've seen is people who have Saturn as the ruling planet of their 7th house, which is the house of partnerships, and like they tend to, or they sometimes at least, marry or end up being partnered with somebody who's a lot older than them. The other thing this can do is it can make them have a very long marriage, right? So this can signify length of time. It can also signify a length of time that they have to wait. So another thing I've seen is people who have Saturn as the ruler of their 7th house is that they don't end up getting married or don't end up having a successful relationship until later in life, until they're older, right? So time, longevity, old age. All of these things are going to have some symbolic effect in the person's birth chart. And the most noticeable way I've seen that is in the 7th house. Saturn in the 1st house is another big impact where the person, remember the 1st house is you, it's the lens of you. And the 1st house, often there's like internalized aspects of Saturn. So you either, if you have Saturn in the 1st house, or if Saturn is your chart ruler, meaning you're a Capricorn rising or you're an Aquarius rising, or you have Saturn on the ascendant, you know, in the 1st house, this often, what I've seen, has the effect of that the person takes on a lot of responsibility. Saturn has to do with responsibility. This person takes on a lot of responsibility early on in life, and they become the person who is reliable, the person who works hard, the person who is stable for the people around them, and the person who takes on the responsibility of being that rock for other people. So they are hard workers and they're responsible people. They're not the kind of people that you have to tell to take more responsibility. If anything, you need to tell them to like loosen up and, you know, let go of some things, right? Talking about karma, another thing that Saturn in the 1st house can do is that the hardest things in life for them are essentially self-inflicted or because of a sense of responsibility that they have. So the greatest burden that they have to bear is something that they have taken on themselves. They've sort of like initiated their own suffering, their own hardship. Where you have Saturn in your chart, this is what I've noticed Saturn doing as a planet of karma. So Saturn wants to level the scales because Saturn wants you to build on a flat foundation. When you're building a house, you have to use a leveler, and the leveler is there as a tool to help you make sure that your foundation is perfectly even, because that's the way that it's going to be the strongest. Saturn wants you to have a strong foundation. So if you are all the way over on one side of a polarity and your patterns have gotten you caught up over here, then what's going to happen is Saturn is going to, in your birth chart, position himself in that polarity, whatever house, whatever sign that is, and act as a barrier. Saturn is a planet of boundaries. Okay? Time is a boundary. Numbers are boundaries. There's a boundary that's put here, and Saturn is going to say no to you in this area of your life, and it's going to make it very hard, and the rules are going to be against you in this area of life. So this is going to be very, very frustrating for people wherever Saturn is placed in their chart, right? And the thing is that Saturn isn't telling you no to this topic or this area of your life, but Saturn is forcing you to do it differently, forcing you to break a pattern. You need to do it differently than you've done in the past in order to have successful outcome in this area of your life. That is what Saturn is saying in your chart. That is what Saturn is telling you to do, is to approach that area of your life differently. There is a book written by Liz Green that I recommend. It talks some about this. It's called Saturn, and then it says a new look at an old devil. An old devil, because Saturn is connected to the earth element and our experience on the earth plane. And the devil is actually also connected to the earth plane and our physical, tangible life experience, but that's another topic for another day. But it can be one reason why Liz refers to Saturn as a devil. The other reason Liz can refer to Saturn as a devil is because Saturn is considered a great malefic, which means that Saturn can cause hardship and trouble in somebody's life experience. The effects of Saturn can be harder to work with until we have like worked through that karma or mastered the area of our life, generally speaking, and sometimes even then, right? You have Jupiter's considered the great benefic because it's easy. This area of life, there's no boundaries, there's no rules, there's no restrictions, it's just an expansion. There's hope, there's faith. Now, sometimes there's things we don't want to expand, right? Like, yes, expand my finances, thank you, Jupiter. Expand my waistline, expand my drug addiction, maybe not so much, right? So it's a little bit like tongue-in-cheek or too black and white to say that Jupiter is a benefic and Saturn's a malefic, but the fact of the matter is that that is often how these are experienced most of the time when people say no to us, when there's boundaries, when there's restrictions, when we have to wait a long time, when we have to work really hard. This is harder energy for most people to work with. So Saturn is, in that term, a devil, right? It's challenging. It's hard for us. This area often is. So let's take a look at some examples. We already talked about what Saturn can look like in the 7th house or in the 1st house, and we can just apply that to like basically any of the other houses. So if you have like Saturn in the 4th house, you will experience this energy in the family of origin, in the home, and potentially with your mother. So there'll be something Saturnian about that, right? Something karmic. You'll most likely have a karmic relationship with your mother. Saturn in the 11th house is an interesting one because this is the planet of hopes, dreams, and wishes. This is arguably a good position for Saturn because the 11th house is considered the house of good spirit, but the effects of it is that whatever goals, because this is the house of hopes, dreams, and wishes, whatever goals this person sets out for themselves, they are going to have to potentially work harder to get to those goals. They might have to put in more time. They might have an issue. It's not really that they have to work harder, it's that potentially they need to put in more work than they are naturally inclined in order to get the results. So there's something about the way that they're approaching their goals that they have to change in order to succeed. Okay, so there's some learning when it comes to setting a goal and getting the benefits of that long-term outcome. The other thing here is this is a house that has to do with groups. So your relationship with groups needs to change in some way. Potentially you have had hardships and difficulties fitting into groups in the past, and now your lessons that you need to learn are revolving around the group dynamic. There is a thing called the Saturn return, and what that means is that Saturn is coming back around to where Saturn was in your birth chart. And when Saturn does this, the effects of the placement of your Saturn is brought front and center. And Saturn is essentially completing one cycle of your life. And a lot of the time in the first cycle of your life, this takes about 28 years, by the way, approximately 28 years for Saturn to come all the way through the zodiac wheel back to where Saturn was when you were born. And that karmic pattern, that 28-year cycle, what happens is there is a repeat of past themes. So this is what I've seen a lot, is people will have a theme. When I'm reading the evolutionary aspect of a person's chart, I'll read, these looks like these are the themes of your past life. And they're like, are you talking, I mean, not always, but a lot of people will say like, are you talking about my past life or my present life? Because a lot of these things are true in their present life. And the reason being is we don't retain all of our cognitive memories when we come into this life generally, right? So what happens is this pattern, because Saturn is the planet of the pattern, this pattern of our past life in the first Saturn cycle is going to repeat itself. And we're going to experience a lot of the same issues and themes that we did in the past life, but it's going to present it in a new way so that we have the opportunity to move past those cycles. We have opportunities to break those cycles. And most likely this is going to be, when you have your Saturn return, this is most likely going to be the most painful, frustrating part of your life. Is going to come to the surface. It's going to be something that's been ongoing your whole life. And Saturn is then asking you, are you done? Are you ready to change? Are you ready to break this pattern? Are you ready to try something new? Are you done with this old pattern? Are you done with this old energy? Something needs to change, something needs to break. We are done, right? And you have an option. And if a lot of the time, if you adapt to this new pattern, and Saturn will generally do everything that it can to force you to change. If you adapt to this new pattern, then you will reap the rewards of Saturn, which is the payoff for hard work, the long, happy, successful marriage, the pension, the wisdom of old age, the success of that area of life that comes with the hard work. So there's a reward with Saturn. But if you resist it, then Saturn often can be experienced more and more as a malefic, and the sort of negatively experienced aspects of Saturn will come to the forefront. The other thing too, this doesn't have to do with the birth chart, but transits, where Saturn is right now, what house that is for you, that area is kind of undergoing its own little like karmic revolution. So wherever Saturn is for you. So Saturn is in Aquarius right now and then about to move into Pisces. So take a look at what house that is for you and notice how that area of your life has undergone some pattern changes or is undergoing some pattern changes, or maybe that you're feeling a internal or external pressure to change some of your patterns in that area of your life. If you aren't experiencing a pressure like that, sometimes the Saturn going through a particular house is giving you the rewards for the hard work that you've put into that area of your life. So once again, it can be experienced malefically or benefically or just challenging, right? It can be a combination of these things. What are the signs that Saturn rules? Saturn's home, Saturn is in his domicile when Saturn is in Capricorn or when Saturn is in Aquarius. Aquarius is our fixed air sign and Capricorn is our cardinal earth sign. We talked a lot about Capricorn. I want you guys to do a little bit of work to understand, revisit the Capricorn qualities and see how Saturn really applies to this. I mean, this really has to do with working really hard towards a goal, putting in the time and the effort and planning accordingly and getting there so that you have something to get you through the winter, so that you have something to give the world, so that you have something for your old age. All of these things are Capricorn things and they're also Saturn things. Then when we get to Saturn as the traditional ruler of Aquarius, because there is a modern ruler for Aquarius too, Saturn as the planet that rules this fixed air sign, this really talks about the structures of our society. So Saturn is actually going through Aquarius right now, and you can see a lot that has to do with the laws, the protective laws of our society have been a topic in the last few years, especially regarding the pandemic and putting laws and restrictions in place. And what types of structures are going to best serve society? Is that socialism? Is that liberalism? Is that conservatism? Is that something else, right? So this is very Saturn and Aquarius topic, very concerned with society, and Saturn is there to put structure in society. So this can be very political. There's other expressions of this too, but Saturn as the ruling planet of Aquarius really has to do with that boundary also, not only that is the structures for the society to help the society function, but also the boundaries between you and me, the boundaries between the individual and the group. And that's when you get into the whole topic of Saturn, of Aquarius being the sign of the group, and Saturn talking about the boundaries that separate me from the rest of the group and the whole Aquarius experience therein. All right, so I think that pretty much wraps up our Saturn video. Please take a look at where Saturn is in your own chart, what sign and what house, and have a think about what you think Saturn has done in your life and how this has played out. Please comment below and I'll be sure to do my best to respond to you guys. And thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please make sure to give it a thumbs up and I'll see you in the next video.